Hello, everybody. It is Dean Z speaking to you from the University of Michigan Law School on a beautiful sunny summer day. I went for a walk at lunch, and may I just say you should all be grateful that there is no such thing as smell-o-vision, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, today I want to talk to you again about misconduct, but this time not misconduct in the admissions process itself, this time misconduct that predates your application that you have to explain in some way when you apply. So let's get started, shall we? This was inspired by an email we got from a young person named Julianne, who says, I am a current undergraduate student hoping to attend law school in the future. I have a question that I don't think you've addressed, and I hope you can help me with it. Last year, I was involved in a complex student conduct situation in which I received a consequence that does not reflect well on my character. This was a situation involving multiple people with whom I had been associated, and I received a sort of blanket punishment that wasn't necessarily deserved based on my involvement. Nonetheless, there is now an infraction on my transcript that I fear will overshadow all of the good things that I'd include in my application to law school. How do you approach applications in which the student has a disciplinary mark on their transcript, and how do you think I should address the situation in the addendum or a personal statement? Thank you for this question. It's a really good one. I've talked before about misconduct that occurs before you apply, but this has some nuance to it that I don't think I talked about in the other episode, and so let's dive in. So this is particularly, misconduct that comes from the institution that you have been attending as opposed to a criminal charge, but often the two are very similar. Cheating is sort of in a world by itself in terms of how to explain that, but when it's something like you were drinking in the dorm room or, using a bong or whatever it is, it's very similar to a criminal charge. So I think the way you approach them are very similar. So first of all, I want to commend Julianne for saying, that the consequence, it does not reflect well on her character. That is very straightforward, very honest. However, then she kind of walks that back where she says, it was a blanket punishment that wasn't necessarily deserved based on my involvement. But it's helpful that she has both of these in here because the first rule is take responsibility, right? There may be cases where you think, I really do not deserve responsibility for this, right? I didn't do it and it was completely unfair. And if you really feel compelled to go down that route, do it carefully, and you should still be trying to take responsibility wherever you can. And you need to think carefully about why it's important to you to really disassociate yourself from the incident, because someone somewhere adjudicated you responsible. So, I think about it from try and be as objective about it as you possibly can. Here, though, Julianne is not saying that I didn't do it. She's saying that maybe the punishment was unfair because it was applied to everyone. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and think that whenever you get punished for something, you think it was too harsh. I mean, I know I feel that way. Like, if you're getting any kind of discipline, the person who's on the receiving end is inclined to think there is some unfairness in it. That's just human nature. But I would not get into that at all in the explanation. I would 100%, if you possibly can, say, yes, I did it. I am sorry I did it. Here's why I did it. And it will never happen again. That's basically the points you need to touch on. You shouldn't belabor anything. It should not be like a 4-page explanation. It should be maybe, about a half page, like a nice paragraph. I would say maybe not much longer than that, unless it's something really complicated. Yeah, and so, but you really definitely want to be taking responsibility for it. But I think the other really important, absolutely critical piece of advice is be clear about what occurred, right? This is often the kind of incident where someone feels, if you do feel remorse for it, or if you just feel annoyed about it or whatever the emotion is, people end up kind of writing around whatever they want to say, and they go off on all sorts of tangents and justifications and so forth, and it becomes very hard to follow when you are the reader. And I really don't want to spend a ton of time on these. I want to go through them and assure myself that the person has learned from the whatever happened and is ready to move to the next stage of their life. I don't want to get into a novel about it, right? So be very clear. And that is where you need to be putting all your energy, not on your prose style here, but on just absolute clarity. And I'm going to give you an example of one that I read, that I just found this. It's from a few years ago. It's not a recent application, but I just sort of stumbled across it this morning just by coincidence. So this person said, and may I say this is also, this applicant was not someone we admitted, but they otherwise had some really strong elements of their application, and I no longer remember exactly what I was thinking about when I didn't admit them, but I am going to guess that a lot of it had to do with this particular explanation, because I just couldn't tell what was going on. So this person says, on whatever date, my friend called for medics to assist my mother as she had fallen, a fact that I was unaware of at the time the call was made. Officers arrived on the scene to assist the medics, as it is my understanding that is standard procedure. You don't need to say that, right? That's not necessary. And I'm starting to get confused already. Officers did enter my mother's home and stated that they were there for someone who had fallen. I was confused, as I had fallen the day before but had not called for assistance this night. I tried to explain this to the officers, at which time a friend stepped in and explained that my mother had fallen and that it was not me. The officers and medics then attended to my mother, who was in her bedroom lying down. The officers charged me with interference with official acts, making the claim that I tried to distract them from their job by making a false statement. I don't know. That's just such a strange story. I have no idea what was going on there. She clearly feels very, that it was very unjust that she was charged with this, but she gives all sorts of details that are not relevant to what happened, and does not say anything that did occur that might have been relevant. Like, was it a contentious conversation with the police officers? Was she saying you absolutely can't come in? All the detail about how the friend had called and she didn't know about it. I don't know what the heck was going on there, and you'd be better off just not getting into it if it's such a complicated story that you're not going to be able to explain it without using up a whole lot of, ink. But you can see why the lack of clarity, that in and of itself makes you think there is something else going on here, that we are just scratching the surface, and I don't have any idea what it is, and I'm just going to stay away from it, right? Like, as a general proposition, schools like Michigan, you don't take risks. If you think there's something hinky going on that has not been adequately explained, you're just not going to take that risk, even though, as I say, in this particular applicant's case, there was a lot else in the application that was very appealing. So be clear. Take your time with it. Write it out, step aside, go back to it in a week. Does it make sense? Show it to someone else, show it to someone else's. Ideally show it to someone who doesn't know anything about the incident, so that they can tell you how it sounds and whether they can follow what's going on. And then try your damnedest not to be defensive when you are discussing it. And if you do that, you will be fine. The number of times where the misconduct is actually something that worries me, as opposed to the tone or content of the explanation, it's like 1 in 1,000, right? That you actually are worried about the actual conduct. It is much more about the way it gets explained. And often, I've seen cases where I might have been a little worried about the conduct, except they did such a great job explaining it that I no longer was concerned about it. Okay, so don't worry. Misconduct does not doom you, whether it's criminal or from your school, but you really do have to do a good job when you're addressing it. All right, that's all I have to say about that. Let's talk about grammar. I have a bonus grammar thing for you today. The first thing I want to talk about is the term oral versus verbal. I double-checked my notes, and as far as I know, I've never talked about this before. If I am repeating myself, I apologize. But let me just tell you, the whole world keeps getting it wrong, so obviously it is important that I repeat myself. Verbal just means words. Oral means what I'm doing here, talking aloud. So if people will talk about an oral contract, that means an agreement that you have made just through speech. But you couldn't say a verbal contract because literally everything is verbal. It's words. That's all verbal means. Verbal does not mean speaking aloud. Does this distinction matter? Yes, I think it does, honestly, because I sometimes find it confusing when people are misusing verbal. So, yeah, please help me with this. Thank you. And then as I was driving into work today, I heard a kind of famous podcaster mispronouncing repeatedly a word. And it is a word that has two pronunciations, but the two pronunciations carry two different meanings. So the word is primer and primer. A primer is a book, a little guide, an introductory text, if you will, to a topic. That is a primer. The thing you slap on the wall before you put your final coat of paint on, that's primer. I don't know why they are pronounced differently, but trust me, they are. And that's another one where it's actually very confusing when you're saying primer and you mean primer. Or maybe it's not really confusing. Maybe I'm just saying that because it gets on my nerves. That is definitely possible. But, you want to know these things, right? Okay. I think that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please continue sending us your questions. I have been combing through them and trying to figure out what I love them all, and I'm trying to figure out what's the content that will be most useful to the biggest group of people. So I appreciate anything you send along very much. And you can send that by email to law.jd.admissions@umich.edu or put it in the comments below. And then Dustin will comb through and tell me what I ought to be answering. So thanks also, as always, to Dustin. I said his name wrong. Let's try that again. Thanks, as always, to Dustin Johnston, without whom none of this would be possible. And wherever you go, go blue.